So ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure today to welcome you all to the conference we host for Infravision, the think tank we created for infrastructure. Since the earliest forms of sedentary societies, infrastructure has shaped the way societies organize themselves and live in cities. Far beyond their technical function, infrastructures influence spatial, economic, and social dynamics, forming the operational backbone upon which urban systems and their interconnections rely. The latest report by the think tank Infravision was on Cities of Tomorrow, Reimagining Urban Infrastructure. It underscored the urgency of rethinking our approach to infrastructure in order to enable cities to address the major challenges of the 21st century: urbanization, demographic dynamics, ecological and energy transitions, aging networks, rising inequalities, and more. Unsurprisingly, the climate change came as a central issue, with the cost of inaction continuing to rise and decisions still which cannot be delayed any further. Faced with systemic impacts affecting both infrastructure and economic balances simultaneously, a fragmented response cannot be effective. It is therefore essential to move beyond a siloed vision of infrastructure in favor of an integrated approach that accounts for interactions between networks, users, and governance models, and that will foster the collaboration between the private and the public sectors. That is the reason we want so much that everybody joins this think tank, for us to join forces to face the challenges we have actually to face as a generation all together. When creating Infravision, we aim to create a space for research, innovation, and constructive dialogue, a space for meaningful collaboration in the interests of all. When we're entering the think tank, the clash of individual interests disappears to give way to productive cooperation in the collective interest. Looking back over the last 20 years, we have overcome altogether an increasing number of crises. When you think about it, we had the global financial crisis back in 2008. We had the sovereign debt crisis in 2010, the migration crisis in 2015, a planetary pandemic which actually hit us all in 2020. The start of the war in Ukraine brought back war in our immediate neighborhood, and then followed by an energy crisis, the rise of interest rates, supply chain disruption, and then everybody now is facing in 2026 the fact that geopolitical threats and the challenge of being thorn between all other powers through tectonic shifts is currently facing Europe. It is when faced with major challenges threatening to shake European Union to its core that Europe must dare to assert itself. Europe can pride itself of being one of the largest markets, the oldest political community, and the leading normative power. Nevertheless, it is increasingly confronted with a genuine existential challenge, as several of its core pillars are being undermined: its unity, its security, and its sovereignty. While this seems to come as a kind of a shock, the situation was already in the making for many years. When Brzezinski wrote almost 30 years ago the Grand Chessboard, he actually said, Western Europe remains to a large extent an American protectorate, and its states resemble what were once the vassals and tributaries of ancient empires. This situation is certainly unhealthy for both America and the European nations. In the face of this reality, we, as Europeans, bear a collective responsibility and a duty to act swiftly by mobilizing to protect and reinvigorate European industry. We have the choice to act with determination if we want to last in a global world where each person's destiny depends more or less directly on the destiny of all. In our industry, we hold collectively the privilege and the capacity to shape the infrastructure of our future societies. This represents a powerful lever for action, one that must be seized as a transformational tool. In that perspective, it reminds me of what Václav Havel was saying in his book, The Power of Powerless. The truth of the world is not confined to mere information about it. It is also an attitude, a commitment, and a moral imperative. The research theme we have chosen for this year is the awakening of the force and how infrastructure can become a powerful lever of transformation. Today's conference aims to provide insights on infrastructure as a strategic lever of Europe's transition, securing competitiveness, sovereignty, and resilience. We will start this conference with a keynote speech from Roland Lescure, French Minister of Economy, Finance, Industrial Sovereignty, Energy and Digital, and who actually couldn't make it for this morning because of Security Council, which was actually organized at the last minute. But he was kind enough to register a video for us all, which we will listen immediately afterwards. We will have a panel gathering prominent figures from the industry and moderated by Julia Ziegler. We will have Nicolas Notebaert, CEO of VINCI Concessions, VINCI Autoroutes, VINCI Airports, and Christine Champion, Head of Global Banking and Investor Solutions, Société Générale, Thomas Reynaud, CEO of Iliad Free. We will have Gabriele Todesca, who is Director of European Investment Fund, Didem Nizanchi, former Chief of Staff, U.S. Department of the Treasury, Senior Fellow Global Climate Policy Project at Harvard, MIT, and finally, we will have a wrap-up keynote from Dr. Susan Nees, energy researcher, Helmholtz Zentrum, Berlin. Thank you, and I give the floor to the video registered from our minister. Thank you all.
Good morning to you all. First and foremost, I would like to apologize. I was planning to be with you today. I was hoping to be with you today. I was very much looking forward to being with you today. But the only reason why I could miss this event came. The president himself called a meeting to assess the situation in the Gulf, including the economic and financial consequences. So I couldn't be with you today. But I would like to still talk to you with this video and address the very important issues that you guys are dealing with today. I would like to say hello to Gwenola Chambon, your Director General. I would also like to say hello to my friend Mathieu Laine, who I believe with Altermine is organizing this day with Vauban Infrastructure Partners. I would also like to say hello to Christophe Béchu, who I believe is in the room, and congratulate him once again for his great elections at the Angers municipality. Every day, we see how vital infrastructure is for our economy. Attacks on energy and transport infrastructure in Ukraine for the last 4 years, but also in the Middle East, remind us every day of our vulnerabilities. And even outside war zones, we had a blackout in Spain and Portugal last year that also showed us how exposed we are. Infrastructure is the backbone of our economies. That is why we are committed to building the infrastructure of the next 50 years to support clean electricity, clean industry, and modern factories. This effort is truly the industrial project of the century. Last November, I opened the Paris Infrastructure Week hosted at Bercy. Maybe some of you were there then. The theme was sovereignty, competitiveness, and resilience. Today, those three words matter more than ever. Our first priority is sovereignty. In the digital sector, with President Emmanuel Macron, we have been committed for the past 10 years to attract and nurture innovation, as well as to welcome infrastructure, such as data centers, as well as entrepreneurs. The results are already visible. In February last year, in 2025, France hosted the AI Action Summit. A total of 109 billion euros of investment was announced and are now being deployed. France is now Europe's leading destination for AI. In energy, France has a clear strategy engaging both public and private actors. We have adopted a multi-year strategy to finance the ecological transition. By 2030, we will need an additional 82 billion euros of investment each year to reach net zero emissions by 2050, mainly in transport and building renovation. We introduced a green industry tax credit in 2024, supporting domestic production of solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, and batteries. Today, France has 185,000 electric vehicle charging points. Nearly 2.8 million homes have been renovated since 2020, amounting to 30 billion euros of investment. France also has the most decarbonized electricity mix in Europe. In 2025, we exported 92 terawatt-hours of electricity, a historical record. And this is due to the fact that 50 years ago, during another energy crisis, our predecessors decided to invest in a first-class nuclear facilities program that is allowing us today to have a more decarbonized, cheaper, and abundant electricity. We need to build the future so that in 50 years, our children can thank us the way we're thanking our predecessors. To maintain this advantage, we're working on both electricity demand and supply. We're working on building the energy infrastructure for the decades ahead. Last February, we published our third multi-year energy plan. It targets a 28% increase in low-carbon electricity production by 2035, from 540 terawatt-hours today to up to nearly 700 terawatt-hours by 2035. This strategy is based on two pillars. First, we want to buy new nuclear reactors, 6 plus 18 options, adding 9.6 gigawatt of capacity with the first unit expected by 2038. Second, a major expansion of renewable energy, with offshore wind increasing from 2 to 15 gigawatts and solar reaching 48 gigawatts. Last week, we launched new tenders to get the projects underway. Our goal is not only to decarbonize, but also to do so with European technologies and jobs, and to diversify our supply chain, including through local content requirements in our tenders. At the end of the day, we are talking about a triple emergency. It's about the environment, it's about our sovereignty, but it's also about creating jobs here and all over Europe. This is why we are also fully engaged at the European level on the issue of European preference. We have won the battle of words. Now we must win the battles of action. Our second priority is resilience. The third National Climate Adaptation Plan, published last March, which Christophe worked on when he was the Environment Ministers, assesses the vulnerability of our infrastructure and sets out concrete solutions to increase resilience. Nuclear power remains the foundation of our energy sovereignty. Small modular reactors represent the next step. Together with renewables and low-carbon hydrogen, this diversified mix helps us better manage supply risk. We will also invest heavily in our electricity grid. Much of France's distribution network is more than 80 years old. Around 200 billion euros will be needed over the next 10 to 15 years to maintain, to modernize, and to expand it. These investments are necessary to prevent grid failure and higher costs for households and businesses down the road. Transport infrastructure is also essential. Our recent National Transport Funding Conference, Ambition France Transport, and the framework law presented in February estimate that 15 to 20 billion euros are needed for major metropolitan areas. In rail, investment will increase by 1.5 billion per year, reaching 4.5 billion euros by 2028. Strengthening the resilience of mobility infrastructure is key, and we are investing accordingly. Our third priority is competitiveness, and there you have a role to play. At a time when public finances are under pressure, cooperation between the public and private sectors is essential. France's economic fundamentals remain solid. The Bank of France forecasts inflation at about 1.7% in 2026, with growth at 0.9%, very close to our forecast, which is at 1%. In 2025, France attracted nearly 1,900 foreign investment projects, creating close to 48,000 jobs. We have remained Europe's leading destination for investment for 6 consecutive years. France also offers more than 60 sites suitable for data center, with strong access to low-carbon electricity at competitive prices. We have strong assets, a competitive tax and regulatory framework, faster permitting for major projects of national interest, a highly dynamic tech ecosystems. I'm reminding you that in the Financial Times FT 1000 ranking, 252 of Europe's fastest growing companies are French, 1 in 4. And Paris is a key hub for infrastructure financing. You are showing it by being here today. On financing, together with 5 other finance ministers from Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland and Spain, I have written to the European Commission to move forward on the Saving and Investment Union. We must accelerate to mobilize European savings to finance our strategic autonomy on a single supervisor, a true securitization market, and a simple and effective regulatory framework. Sovereignty, resilience, competitiveness, these are our 3 priorities for building tomorrow's infrastructure. I know they will be at the heart of today's discussion, and they must guide all of us. From the canals of Henry IV to the public works of Colbert, France has a long tradition of cooperation between the public and private sectors in infrastructure. The alliance between a strategic state, industrial players, and long-term investors between you and us is what will ensure our collective success. I wish you excellent discussions, a very good day. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. My name is Julia Seeger. Thank you very much indeed for the introduction. I'm a tech and science journalist, and I'm delighted to be with you today to moderate this exchange. So we're brought together today because Europe's infrastructure is at a strategic inflection point. The continent is simultaneously pursuing major transition while navigating a deteriorating geopolitical environment, but also rising sovereign debt cost and growing competitive pressure, both from the United States and from China. And the central question is not whether these transitions are necessary, it's whether Europe has the investment frameworks, the regulatory architecture, the industrial and innovation capacity, and the governance structures also to deliver them, and to deliver them not only at the pace and the scale required, but making sure that we don't sacrifice competitiveness and sovereignty in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest, Nicolas Notebaert, CEO of VINCI Autoroutes, and Christine Champion, Head of Global Banking and Investment Solutions at Société Générale, Thomas Reynaud, CEO of Iliad, Gabriele Todesca, former Chief of Staff, Director of the European Investment Fund, Didem Nizanchi, former Chief of Staff, U.S. Department of Treasury, Senior Fellow Global Climate Policy Project at Harvard and at MIT. Please do give them a warm round of applause. Thank you very much indeed for being with us today for this fascinating conversation. I'd like to perhaps start with the first key question, which is, of course, financing the transition while preserving competitiveness. Europe has spent the last decades building an ambitious transition agenda. We have the Green Deal, we have the digital decade, successive infrastructure investment frameworks as well. All that said, the Draghi report today is unambiguous. Europe is falling behind. So I'm going to turn to you first, Gabriele. Is the transition agenda of infrastructure part of Europe's solution today, part of its competitiveness, or has it become part of the problem? And perhaps what are the one or two reforms you believe matter most today?
Hello. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to Infravision and Vauban for having invited me to this panel and discussion. So, to your question, I would say the straight answer is yes, in the sense that we are definitely on the green transition still makes sense, definitely makes sense in the mid to long run. What we see is that not only it makes sense because of the environmental considerations that have always been present, but also the most recent years, the last 5 to 10 years, have shown that green transition makes sense also for all the reasons that the minister was saying just in the video now, which are related to sovereignty, resilience, and independence of European energy sources. So green transition makes sense for a lot of reasons. Now, the cost, we're seeing it today in the news, what happens around the world, the cost of depending on third country for our energy needs is just exorbitant. So we're seeing it today, any third country, and that means that we need to have our own energy needs covered domestically. That is really the objective. If we don't, then we will be at the mercy of third parties, third countries, and they will use this power, this leverage on our countries to achieve whatever their objectives are. So we're seeing it also in the news and in the weaponization of energy that Russia has imposed on Europe, and everything that is happening currently in the Gulf and in the Middle East. So the straight answer is yes. Of course, the big question is how to do it, right? So which is not an easy question, but yes, I would leave it there.
Thank you, Gabriele. And Christine, thank you also for being with us today. From your vantage point in global banking and capital markets, what is your take on this? And how do you see the investment landscape for sustainable and digital infrastructure in Europe today?
So, first of all, to say that the capital is there. capital is there. If we look at the private savings, we have 33 trillion accumulated private savings in Europe, ready to which are available for investment into European projects. And if we look at foreign investors, they are also there, strong appetite for Europe. Even more, I think in the current environment, Europe is a region of political and institutional stability, where the rule of law is respected. And we all know that for infrastructure especially, where long-term, we are talking about long-term assets, the rule of law is absolutely essential. So yes, capital is there, is available, and so the real challenge is very much about deployment. And talking about deployment, three main challenges or difficulties that Europe is saving, which were well presented in the Draghi report. It's about fragmentation, it's about conservative attitude to risk, and it's about competitiveness. So on the fragmentation, Europe operates 27 frameworks with different pricing mechanisms, permittings, and so on. So while the national transposition cannot be avoided, it's about having it rapid, stable, with no stop and go, as we have seen here and there, which are extremely detrimental in terms of investment capacity. On the conservative attitude to risk, it's probably part of our DNA in Europe, probably part as well of our long history, and there is benefits of being prudent. However, it's about being aware of this approach. If we look at European households again, they are investing mostly in low-risk assets. And there are other areas where we see this attitude toward risk, which is detrimental or can be detrimental, especially when you are in an environment where there is more uncertainty. And so it's how do you take risk in an environment where there is more of this uncertainty. Last, on competitiveness, stagnation of productivity, energy dependence, they were mentioned. Also the investment in innovation or research. And here it's about doing more of this, meeting these challenges. So on this, just to say that policymakers, public sector can really help further by bringing pragmatism, pace, and competitiveness.
Thank you very much. Thomas Reynaud, Iliad Free has been really a disruptive force in telecom infrastructure for several years. Where do you see the biggest mismatch between Europe's ambition and the reality of its digital infrastructure, and how far is Europe from truly from having a truly competitive digital infrastructure?
First, I'd like to start with a positive message. We often hear that there is some kind of mismatch and we're late in terms of digital infrastructure. It's not entirely true. If we look at connectivity and at telecom, in fact, Europe is in a quite positive situation, even if we compare to the US or to China. We are much more advanced than the US in terms of rollout of fiber. We are more or less on par in terms of 5G with China and the US. And if we take a step back, 3 of the major suppliers of telecom equipment, 2 of them are European. You have Nokia and Ericsson. So I have a slightly different view. We don't have any problem of connectivity in Europe, especially if you take into account the fact that telecom services are quite affordable in Europe compared to the US, where there is a real digital divide based on the cost of telecom services. The real mismatch is somewhere else. We are still very dependent on China and on the US on the new layers of digital infrastructure, computing powers, GPU, AI platform, data centers. In other words, in Europe, we transport data quite well, but we have a hard time to give value to this data. And this is the key topic. And for us, we see it as a strategic vulnerability, because what is at stake with AI? It's not only the way we get informed, the way we get trained. It's not only a question of competitiveness. this is the question of our values. So it's time to accelerate. We all read the Draghi report, but it's time to move from a report to action with some very concrete levers that have not been activated yet in Europe and in France.
That's exactly what the minister was saying. We won with words, now we need to win with actions. Nicolas, at VINCI, you're tasked with decarbonizing, I think we can say it, the highest emitting sector, transport. So could you tell us a little bit more, maybe let's start with airports, and could you tell us more about the VINCI Airport roadmap to make airports a little bit more multimodal and multi-energy hubs for future mobility systems? And maybe a question that people are asking themselves in the room, will we be able to overcome the competitiveness challenge related to sustainable aviation fuels, the so-called SAF?
Thank you. So again, linking with the previous topic, we have a single world, one planet, so you have worldwide issues about climate change. And clearly, transportation, mobility is a core issue. Why? Because mobility needs will increase. The human factors are above everything. We had 9/11, as Gwendola said, we had the financial crisis, we had a lot of crises. Air traffic is one of the fastest growing needs in the world, but also road traffic is also growing as GDP. Air traffic is more like 1.5 to 2 times GDP. And it uses a lot of carbon. So this challenge is one of our generation. Limit mobility, I know there were some scientists and so on, very limited, fortunately, is not possible with human beings. I mean, I'm sorry for the people in the room who think that we can have borders against any type of migration. Human beings migrate. Today, the highest factor of movements in air traffic is visiting friends and family. It's not Bernard Arnault having a jet fuel or any rich people. It's very limited. Most of people is first VFR, then tourism, and then business, which is growing less than VFR and tourism. That's something to be known. It's not rich people doing miles everywhere. It's a lot of people. Secondly, yes, it's possible to decarbonize. Why? First, because big groups, we are world leader in private airports in the world, can give the example. So naturally, an airport is like a small city, but it's very important to give signal that it's possible. It's buildings. You work on energy of the building. It's local movements of planes and cars around the airport. And you can also have some solar energy within the airport. So taking these actions, we are world leader in decarbonization, which is that you can really do net zero 2030, 20 years in advance to Paris Climate Act in airports. Okay, airports is not the planes. Then what are the tools and the positive attitude before these wars in aviation? It's the best activity in the world, today's world, for multilateralism. Despite wars, it's the only activity where you still have debates about security, naturally, about safety, and about decarbonization, where even if the path of speed is different between the states, they accept to cooperate to find a way to find solutions. So yes, the next challenge is to promote the new generation of SAF. Again, private money is needed. Private investment with the right framework is needed. The particularity of Europe is that we don't have land. So we will not be able in Europe to promote a big land use of, let's say, former agricultural land like in Brazil and the US to be put in the jet fuels. But we have other solutions. We have cheap energy like in France. We have neighbors. Personally, I believe that the synergy with a country like Morocco, which is not so far, which has the right green energy to offer. So we can produce new generation of jet fuels in Europe in order to stay in the path. So my message is very clear. First, mobility will not stop; it will rise in the world, and our task, government and private sector, is to promote at each level all solutions to decarbonize, to limit the effect of climate change. Airports, we have the solutions. For airlines and passengers, we'll develop together all solutions to promote SAF in order to mitigate the effects of airside movements in the future.
Thank you, Nicolas. Didem, hello and welcome as well to the panel. You've studied it, you've shaped transition policy on the other side of the Atlantic, and we're witnessing a growing divergence between the United States and European approaches to different types of transition. I'm thinking about industrial policy, the role of the state, the pace also of regulatory implementation. From your experience on the ground, what are the most significant implications for companies today trying to compete and invest across both of those regions?
Sure. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think there's a real divergence here, and it's widening. And I want to answer this from experience, having sat on both sides. At the Treasury Department, I saw in real time IRA being implemented and designed. At Bloomberg, I was leading the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, where it was important to work closely with companies, aligning and designing frameworks and strategies across jurisdictions. And the honest answer is, given this widening gap between the US and EU perspectives, I think it's gotten a lot harder for investors to navigate. And three implications stand out for me. First, there are no longer two approaches to the same transition. It's increasingly a very different visions of where the world is heading, and what that is really driving things in diverging strategic directions. On one hand, Europe has recognized that transition is about low carbon economy, and it's important. On the other hand, US seems very preoccupied with hydrocarbons, with some recognition of technologies around nuclear and carbon capture being necessary for the long-term needs of the country. Specifically, Europe has made transition and energy security a significant strategic objective through many legislations and frameworks, and the US is now pursuing a completely different strategy, one of energy dominance and security. And in some instances, the administration has taken a direct investment approach, even in companies who are looking at extracting critical minerals in the United States. And the administration would very much reject any suggestion that any of its technologies are related to the clean energy transition. So this creates a real challenge for companies and investors who are trying to operate in both markets. And what counts as clean energy in Europe may very well be defunded in the United States because the current administration does not believe that destination at all. Second is policy durability is incredibly uneven. Infrastructure, as we all know, is a long-term investment, and it requires policy durability through election cycles. China has always understood this with its long-term, sustained strategic industrial policies. IRA was the first American attempt in generations to catch up with that commitment, though obviously through the Big Beautiful Bill, it's very much been reversed in a majority of areas. And likely the reversals are going to continue. Just this week, the administration's fiscal year 2027 budget made significant cuts in the Department of Energy, and most likely, as we have all seen, President Trump's request for $1.5 trillion of war funding is going to further crowd out capital in not only clean energy areas, but also other priorities. Tariffs are also have compounded this uncertainty and have been used as new and novel ways of points of leverage in directing and trying to get investment in the United States. And third, there is a sharp divergence on regulatory implementation. Companies operating in both jurisdictions are receiving very contradictory signals. In the US, deregulation has been very swift, rescinding decades, year-long rules around climate and transition. ESG frameworks have been actively opposed. Permitting by executive order has been swift in some areas of preferred technology, all enacted within the past year in months. Europe, by contrast, the regulatory implementation is slower and more demanding, but it certainly is much more durable and stable for investors and companies. So while in the US, certain areas, the capital can really mobilize quickly, the durability of policy and the regulatory signals are much more stable for investors.
Thank you, Didem. So current geopolitical tensions are now bringing a second key issue into sharp focus, which is sovereignty. And it's nothing new, of course, but perhaps it's now taking a renewed urgency, effectively reshuffling also the deck when it comes to transitions and altering how priorities and partnerships and pathways are also decided and defined. Nicolas and Anne-Christine, how do rising geopolitical tensions and increasing protectionism specifically affect the ability of European infrastructure players to compete and to win projects abroad? And what are the implications perhaps for the types of projects that are being now prioritized from, perhaps let's start with the operator's point of view and then from the banker's point of view?
There's a paradox. The world is complex, but it is... it's a challenge for Europe. It is easier than ever to invest outside of Europe in infrastructure. Why? First, there are needs. Our last investment for VINCI Concessions, we became also world leader in highways, was in India. 700 kilometers of India. I met the high administration of roads in India. They have a need of $36 billion in 10 years. And what they told me was, we deliver, and we sell. We use private investors from the world to sell. Can you remember that in France, we opened the capital of privatized highways 20 years ago? We are still debating it, still. In India, they do it every 5 years, and they're in full steam. So one of the challenges of Europe is trust, and to rebuild what we did in the end of the 19th century with the leading path of the world, or what we did in Southern Europe in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to build the best highway system in the world, which is south of Europe. So first, a lot of countries. I mentioned India. It's the same with Brazil. Brazil, at full speed, gets a private investor to develop his highway sector. And then the second good surprise is FX rise. The way to get it is very competitive, using private equity, debt everywhere in the world. And secondly, the request of these new countries is positive towards European values. They accept the idea that we fight against climate change and we work about adaptation. When I met the Highway India Authority, they asked me a lot of questions. The only points they rose is how to develop fast-track EV charging in India. That was the main topic of the talk, because they want to accelerate what we did progressively in other parts of the world. So I think the rest of the world that could be complicated, in fact, takes the benefit of what we did in the past, and this model works. The challenge for Europe, in reverse, is that we have the right values and directions, but we are too complicated in implication. Europe has the right value, but it is a bureaucracy. When I went to India, I thought India was a bureaucracy. My challenge as European today is that Europe, sorry to be a bit straight, has become more a bureaucracy than India. Can you read my lips, because I think it's right. Europe is more a bureaucracy than India. Don't think about India 20 years ago. So the question is how to keep our values, how to keep our interests, sovereignty, and so on, how to destroy the bureaucracy while keeping nurturing the objective. Some people did not understand that most European companies said, oh, we want to get rid of some European regulation. It's not to get rid of the green objectives, because the green objectives who are all in the room, we need to sustain. There is only one planet. But the way Europe or national countries translated this objective is wrong. It takes time. It delivers no trust to the private sector use, and it's slow. I will give you a last example on it. The federal government, the present administration, does not believe in climate change. Texas is a Republican state, which again has not the same value. And I give you a challenge in the room. It is far easier to do a solar panel today in Texas than in Europe and than in France. It takes approximately 18 months to deliver solar panels, huge plants in Texas today, than in France. So the main question we have to ask is to keep our value, our direction, our energy, but to become speed. Speed is the time. Use private capital and rebuild trust between governments, Europe, and private sector to come back, because we have equity, we have debt, we have people, we have a right level of GDPs. We need to rebuild this trust and full speed to let private sector invest in decarbonization, energy, infrastructure. We have the qualities. If governments and institutions are the problem, they should come back to be part of the solution with the private sector in Europe.
Thank you. And Christine? And then Thomas.
Beauty of that kind of discussion is to create controversy. I do not agree with you that Europe is a big problem, is the bureaucracy, and I think that we should be cautious of always pointing at Europe as the scapegoat of all our problem. What is true is that Europe is too fragmented. We have different certification with different procurement rules. But I'm going to take a very concrete example. For example, when it comes to data center or industrial project. And this is a key question. This is the question of the speed of execution. The problem is not the European regulation. The big issue is the over-transposition of European law into local laws. I'm going to take a very concrete example. In France, if you want to run an industrial project, let's say a data center, you need to run a study that was imposed by Europe, which is an environmental assessment of flora and fauna. Europe imposed 4 months. The transposition in French law was 12 months. It kills any industrial project. Before you have the right to register your permit, you need 12 months of assessment of flora and fauna, where in Europe it's only 4 months. So in many cases, it's a question of over-transposition, and I think it would be very important in order to have, because one of the issues of Europe is that we don't have a scale. And in terms of infra, and especially digital infra, if you don't have scale, you're dead. So in order to build scale, we need to complete the integration of Europe. And maybe one of the issues would be, or solution would be a coalition of willingness countries that would take the commitment to translate European law exactly in the same way in their local law.
I fully agree with what you told. It's not a disagreement. When I was mentioning Europe, to be clear to the audience, is not Brussels, okay? It's Brussels and all the governments. Because I agree with you, we became in Europe not only a bureaucracy at the Brussels level, but an overall bureaucracy. So I agree with you, it's not because of Brussels that we behave like that, is this double scale of governments and Europe makes that it is slow. And so I'm not here for political reasons to debate if it should be in Brussels or in Paris or whatever, but we became a very slow part of the world in terms of deploying capital, infrastructure, whatever, digital or physical. So I more agree with you, it's not Brussels the problem, it's the overall way. There is no trust, particularly between the private sector and the institution, I would say.
Thank you. And Christine on this question as well.
So we have been very good in Europe at infra, concession, public-private partnership and so on, long-standing experience. If we look at the rail network that we have in France or in Europe, there is not anything like this anywhere else in the world. True that we are today slow or slower, but this can change. And it means that, to come back to your question about European player outside Europe, thanks to this long-standing experience in infra, we have European worldwide champions. A number of them around this panel today, with investment in India, in Latin America, and so on. We know about the risk sharing, and the rising in geopolitical tensions mean more risk. So we are very knowledgeable from developers, operators, financing standpoint on the risk allocation, on how to best allocate risk, on the financial engineering as well. And as a bank, is about advising on structuring this at best to lower the cost of financing, whether it's a debt cost, equity costs. So we have very strong champions, also in infra funds, that was also mentioned, who are today winning a lot of projects around the world. So that's, to me, is a very positive and shows the strength of Europe in that matter.
So, of course, when we talk about sovereignty, we talk about dependencies, and European dependencies clearly extend beyond energy to the entire supply chain. I'm thinking about solar panels, of course, and critical components. How should policymakers prioritize which dependencies to address first, and what lessons have you learned, Gabriele, from recent supply chain disruptions?
I think the question is... The question is also related to, okay, we are going through this transition. We don't want to replace dependencies on fossil fuels with dependencies on other things that are necessary to generate energy domestically, right? Because effectively, this is part of what is happening. Of course, it's not the same in a sense that you think of dependencies on imported fossil fuels as something that is, it's really like a tap that can be turned off, right? And if you're, if it's turned off, then you're stuck and you depend on a third party for your survival, right? Whereas dependencies on components for infrastructure are different in a way that once you've built it, it's there, and it produces energy almost for free for a very long period of time. So you also need to look at dependencies a little bit different. But it is true that we depend, and in some cases quite heavily, on third countries for essential components of our energy infrastructure. And in that sense, the way we look at it is we split sectors and areas, and also within sectors there are certain components or certain parts that are essential, into three different buckets, let's say, right? So areas where Europe still has strategic independence, right? So areas where we have all the technology, all the materials, all the components that are necessary to produce an infrastructure or a product domestically, yeah? There are areas where this is the kind of middle sector where we have to gain or regain independence, strategic independence, and this is the example is, for example, in EVs or electric vehicles. It's clear that Europe had really a head start in vehicles in the auto industry, but when it comes to electric vehicles, that head start has been lost to particularly China, right? The question is, will Europe be able to catch up or regain that independence? And this is applicable to many other sectors that we have in the energy value chain. And third, I think this is perhaps the one that we have to be most honest and frank about, is there are areas where we are totally dependent on third countries and where we have to accept it. Of course, accepting it doesn't mean we have to blindly accept it. We have to accept it with a way of solving the situation, of rebalancing the situation in at least the midterm, right? But there is no way around sort of not accepting the fact that we are dependent on third countries. And I think that applies to certain important sectors in the energy value chain, like solar panels, obviously, batteries, even for wind. There are certain components where China's global market share is 100%. So how can you be more dependent than that? And also, I think one comment by Nicolas was interesting of how many other countries are looking at Europe and the lead that we had in certain sectors to try and move more quickly after sort of the learning curve and try to learn from us. I think Europe probably also needs some humbleness and do the same in certain sectors. Why don't we go to China or other countries which have developed very quickly, very well, and better than us? It is better, right? And try to learn from them.
You wanted to answer maybe briefly.
I naturally agree about this positive challenge. One of the issues of Europe is to understand where we are strong, and our American colleague told us that finally our values are not so bad. We prefer to have a coffee as this morning or a beer tonight than to make war. So I really think that for the future, this big empire is not what people really think. And I think European people, our people, have the right values about living in peace together, probably because we had a lot of wars in the past. And we need to keep this path. Now, I give a positive example about what you said. We need to be proud. In France today, particularly at VINCI Autoroute, but not only, we are the highest, most densified network of highways in the world for EV charging. Nobody knows that. Because this trust that we need to build together. So I see my friend Mathieu Len. So sorry, Mathieu, I don't have the same culture. You know, there is this proverb, I don't know if it's Confucius or not. The wise man look at the moon. There is the moon Artemis today. And the stupid guy looks at the finger, okay? We look a little bit too much at the finger. What I would like to be proud is let's develop EV charging in Europe at the full speed and not to check who is making the money, who is taking advantage of it, is Total really sincere in decarbonizing, and this type of debate. These debates that we have sometimes kill the full speed we need, okay? We could develop infra, we can develop EV charging, we can develop solar panels, and we have the equity, we have the industry, we have the company, we have the networks, we have fiber. If we all unite in the right path and we recreate the trust between people, governments and business, I think we are the best place in the world to invest.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thomas, I think you want to respond as well, but I also have a question. You recently argued that European digital sovereignty is not just a concept anymore. It's a question of survival, clearly. It represents, you say, the right to exist in the world of tomorrow. What are the key levers for Europe to catch up and develop a sovereign digital ecosystem? I'm, of course, thinking about the cloud and about what Iliad Free is doing with Scaleway.
Yes, I think there are 4 levers in order to accelerate and really to develop European sovereignty. The first one is scale. I mentioned it. We need to finish European integration of the single market, and we should stop being a very fragmented market. 2, and it's debated right now in Brussels, we absolutely need a European buy act when it comes to digital services. If you take the example of SpaceX in the US, they totally revolutionized the space industry, but they had their order book totally filled with public money from the NASA. That's a reality. And I don't say that we should switch to some kind of a technological autarky in Europe, but at least 30% of public procurement should be earmarked for European companies. The third component, and this is super important when it comes to AI, to data management, to cloud services, is energy. We need affordable, green, low-carbon energy. Sam Altman said it. The cost of AI will converge with the cost of electricity. In France, we have a low-carbon energy. We don't have any visibility on the cost of energy in France, and especially for data center. Data centers are not considered as electro-intensive, high-intensity user of electricity. And we had, over the last 4 years, 3 different regimes of tax on our electricity. And when you develop a data center with a 20-year horizon. And when you need to sign some and give some visibility to your customers, and you had 3 different regimes when it comes to the cost of electricity of your data center in France in the last 4 years, it's nonsense. And the last topic, and I'm quite optimistic on that, we need brain power. We have excellent engineering schools in Europe. Sometimes, and too often, our top engineers go to the West Coast. And if you look at the laboratory of OpenAI or Google Mind, they are full of European and French engineers. So we need to bring them back. So what we do concretely, we started the cloud services where we master the software part 10 years ago. Which means that we're totally immune from any extra European regulation, and especially the Cloud Act and the Patriot Act, and that's super important. And I can see that there is a European moment because our cloud services Scaleway is gaining momentum. And in fact, we have a new commercial chief officer. He's based in Washington, and his name is Donald Trump. And he creates a lot of momentum for us. But that's super important because today, and this is the reality of your organization, 99% of cloud services are managed by US and Chinese companies with an exposition of your data to extra European legislation. And when you take the combination of Patriot Act and Cloud Act, it means that you don't have any data privacy of your company. There are solutions, some developed by Dassault, some developed by the Iliad Group, such as Scaleway. And there is a European momentum. It started with the Liberation Day. And since the Liberation Day, for example, we signed 5 of the top CAC 40 French company. We signed the city of Copenhagen in the middle of the Greenland crisis in order to manage the data from the citizen of Copenhagen. And recently, we signed a very important contract with the European Commission for their digital euro project. So clearly, I think that the main dependency of Europe today is data, AI, cloud services, and the way we protect our data.
And the need for a more integrated economy within the European Union as well. Thank you very much. Didem, has the climate transition become a tool of geopolitical, I'm going to say competition rather than cooperation? And what additional levers can be harnessed to secure and accelerate the climate transition in this specific context?
Sure. The reality is that it's both competition and cooperation. First on competition, I think the most important structural shift that's happened in the last 5 years is that climate policy and energy security have become industrial policy. And the question is no longer who reduces emissions the quickest, but it's who builds factories, controls supply chains, and sets the standards for how to define the next energy systems and technologies. So the competition is real. And China is very dominant in all 3 of those areas. Second, the competition is creating fragmentation. China is really pairing its manufacturing prowess and creating real geopolitical leverage through its exports of its manufactured goods to the global south. And in some ways, that's creating new dependencies. Many countries in the global south are accelerating their transitions using Chinese technology because it's most affordable at scale. And this has given China a really unique geopolitical leverage and strategy. And both EU and the US are absent from these markets because they simply can't compete on the price of these goods. And third, on levers, where cooperation still works. First is economics. The cost of renewables continues to go down, and that's a structural force that's going to take place regardless of policy. Second, energy and economic security. The pivot to clean energy is very well understood, and the point is made again and again with every energy shock that going towards clean energy is not just going green, but it's also national security. The third lever is capital allocation, obviously where the money goes, transition happens. And fourth is execution capacity. Like whatever, what makes lever is that most improving is that it can accelerate deployment immediately without really waiting for policy ambition. And the fifth lever really is something that the EU has a commanding lead on in terms of regulation. I mean, CBAM, for example, is influencing very much global actors to set their own carbon prices and contemplate establishing their own ETSs to remain competitive and to be able to export into the European market. And that's a powerful way to spread policy without even requiring formal agreements. On cooperation, I think we can all see that there are targeted cooperations. 4 weeks ago, the IEA had a group of countries release 400 million barrels of oil. That's a positive sign of cooperation. So even in a fragmented world, countries can basically align around shared values and interests. There are also new cooperations springing up. The Brazilian COP presidency last fall announced an open coalition around carbon compliance markets that drew participation from a large and small economies that were geographically diverse. So, you know, in the end, cooperation is changing. It's no longer multilateral. It's more targeted. It's incentive-driven, and at times embedded in the competition in itself. And I think in the world we're in, that's maybe the most effective and realistic path forward.
Thank you, Didem. Now, following up on sovereignty, each sector is clearly navigating its specific challenges alongside common cross-cutting issues, the emergence of AI, which is intensifying both competition and collaboration. And Christine, in this context of reindustrialization and technological sovereignty, consolidations and collaborations, like the one we're seeing, for instance, between Airbus, Thales, and Leonardo in the satellite industry, are expected to expand. We're thinking particularly in the areas of AI and robotics. What is your perspective on this trend, and is the future of high-tech competitiveness about owning capabilities, or rather is it about connecting them?
So I think the kind of partnership we've seen, we are seeing in the satellite with Leonardo, Airbus and Thales is extremely interesting because it's about building ecosystem that can compete at scale. And here we are bringing three together, they are bringing together three strong competitors to really be able to compete at scale. On satellite, we've seen it during the Ukraine war with the Starlink situation. The satellite communication is a vital element for Europe. There are other areas which are being identified like this, be it in cyber, in semiconductors. And so this ecosystem, I think, is extremely important because to the point that you just made on the cooperation and competition, I don't believe that any nation can think that it will own everything. If you look at today's supply chain, AI, US championing AI, it's data centers. For AI, data centers, you need chips, you need GPUs, you need NVIDIA. NVIDIA supply chain is relying on European and Asian entities. If you look at what's happening in the Middle East, on the oil, etc., this is impacting China, fertilizers, and some segment of the industry in China. So in the world we live in, there is no way any nation, any single nation can own everything and master everything. And if you look at long-term history, imperialism never made it, actually. So it's about cooperation and it's about the balance of power. I was over the weekend playing with my kids, Richesse du Monde. You don't own all the richesse, okay? It's about which you have, and when you are at the table of bargaining and playing, what is it that you have? And in Europe, there are numbers of strengths that we have where we can compete at scale, where we are competing at scale, and it's about championing these.
Thank you. Gabriele, innovation in infrastructure carries a risk profile, perhaps that conventional infrastructure finance struggles to price, and AI is restructuring the infrastructure requirements at an extraordinary speed. Are European operators in a position to keep pace with that demand, or is Europe structurally disadvantaged relative, for instance, to the United States and China? What should guide the current and coming investment trade-offs?
Yeah, we were actually discussing this just before the coffee time, sort of with someone. And I think the way that I see it is there is clearly in the infra asset class a lot of people, a lot of investors take the perspective of if you look at it from the last 50 years, investors were investing in infrastructure as an asset class which is where you have reliable cash flows, steady cash flows, a lot of predictability, no technology risk, and this was the sort of the basic assumption for every investor coming into the sector. Now, you apply that logic to the new sort of paradigm of infrastructure investments today, and of course it's different because we're trying to fit the same framework with asset classes or types of assets, which are, of course, if you look at the business models, they are probably similar in the sense that they're hard assets and they generate steady cash flows and that you have some long-term visibility and so on. But of course, it's data center with all the risks that are related to the sort of perception of risk, which of course is a particular to every type of data center. It's not the asset class, the sector has exactly the same type of risks and so on. But if you compare it with motorways or airports and so on, of course we're talking about very different classes of risks. So again, I'll try to sort of be brief because I won't take too much time for this. But I think in the sector of AI or infrastructure, so data centers, perhaps the risk has been highlighted earlier as well. I think you mentioned fragmentation, you mentioned energy costs. I think those two are probably the two of the key problems, disadvantages that Europe has relative to the rest of the world. I would add permitting. Permitting is probably, I think, even the biggest problem. The time that is required, the cost of permitting, if you compare it to other parts of the world. So those three are probably the biggest disadvantages. They're not insurmountable, right? But we're starting with a bit of a handicap.
In terms of permitting, I'm just going to give a very concrete example. It takes 3.5 years to create a new data center in France, more than 2 years of administrative review. It takes less than 10 months in the US and even less in China.
Didem, also on this question from your American view on this.
I think it's important to be precise on where US is in the lead and where it's overstated. Where it's real is in the infrastructure layer of AI. The hyperscaler investment is real, and US leads in that. And that means the physical substrate and the foundations of AI are largely controlled by non-European actors, which raises legitimate sovereignty concerns. But the US advantage is more mixed than the headlines suggest. The US is not, I would say, operating a coherent and cohesive national AI infrastructure strategy. It's operating in a very fast-moving, dynamic market, but not always in a coordinated way. And increasingly, as many of the colleagues have said on this panel, power infrastructure and energy are binding constraints. By contrast, China, as mentioned, has taken a much more holistic approach and construction and energy and power necessary to basically operate these data centers is very easily established. This distinction becomes even clearer when you look at robotics. The US continues to lead in software and intelligence layer, and the AI that will power the next generation of robotics. But robotics ultimately depends also on manufacturing scale and hardware integration and deployment in the physical economy. And there, China has a clear advantage, but Europe has pockets of strength. So the broader point is that competitiveness is shifting from innovation alone to ability to integrate innovation with industrial capacity and infrastructure. And much has been said about the recommendations of the Draghi report, and that the implementing those will certainly put Europe in a materially different path. But I think ultimately transatlantic competition would be far more efficient than fragmentation. And for that to work, there needs to be trust and predictability, which for reasons obvious, we are short on these days. If technology access becomes a geopolitical bargaining tool, it risks pushing Europe towards duplication and fragmentation, and that ultimately serves no one well, including the United States. So the path forward for Europe is to prioritize dependencies, to pursue its focus and interests, and with selective interdependence.
So the clock is ticking, so I'd like to move on to resilience, if that's okay. It's long been overlooked, but now it's moving at the forefront as a critical dimension as well. Gabriele, resilience and sovereignty. Also, I'd like to ask you, Nicolas, about that example you were giving about India. I'll get to you in just a minute, but Gabriele, resilience and sovereignty are sometimes used interchangeably, but you say they're actually quite different. What exactly is a truly resilient system? What does it look like?
Well, the way at least we define resilience is at two levels, basically. We refer to macro resilience when it comes to infrastructure, when we're referring to the resilience of a system or the resilience of the economy, let's say. What we said earlier about sovereignty, what we said earlier about dependencies, what we said about autonomy, these are all related to resilience of a system, resilience of the economy of Europe, right? So we need to be a resilient economy if we want to compete in the world. Then resilience also has another meaning, and this we see more and more at the asset level. So not only we need to be resilient as systems, we also need to have resilient assets. So a project, a power plant, a solar panel system needs to have resilient needs to be resilient in itself. And what that means is we need to be aware of all the physical risks, physical security risks that may impact our assets. We need to be aware of all the digital, so cyber, for example, risks that may impact our assets. And we need to be sure that we're dealing with those risks properly. I think what we're seeing is that there's been a lot of complacency in the past years about this aspect of resilience at the asset level. Now there are new European directives and legislation that is changing the situation, that is trying to move shift the attention to these areas of asset resilience and security. And we see also that fund managers and investors in the asset class are realizing that these are not or these are no longer tick the box or sort of compliance issues, but are rather proper business issues. So they're value drivers to some extent. So I think there's clearly a shift in landscape.
Nicolas, you were telling us about that example, that project that you have in India, and you wanted to tell us about the resilience plan you have there.
Thank you. More globally, I think Christophe Béchu, when he was recently minister, showed us that we need to think ahead both on mitigation of carbon emission, but also in adaptation and resilience. And we should not arbitrate between the two. What is the issue today? First, we encounter in our networks terrible climate events that did not occur before. We had flooding in our Japan airport, which cut all massive floods and electric shortage, and the tanker moved around the bridge. We had floods around highways that were coming every centuries, now every 10 years. We had fires growing the highways. Okay, it is now. Secondly, the message throughout the world, and I mentioned India, but it's the same in France or US or whatever, private investment, as from insurance to banks to equity, can help to limit these events. Why? In the past, I was mentioning what I called the boomers concession. It is to use the money for concrete growth. You have a highway, two lanes, then you think in 10 years I put a third lane. Okay. Today in Europe, this growth of volume is not the main issue. So we can use very easily the concession model, the private money investment, to invest now in resilience and adaptation in order to limit the events, because everybody in the room knows that in insurance, it's better to invest before you maximize the effects. So the plan, and that's this year, this week, starting in the French Senate, is that to keep tolls in the future and to rise investment now. All the industry thinks that there is around 30 billion to be spent in the French highways only. So you imagine Germany, you imagine anywhere in Europe, and India is even more. To use this tolls model so that you invest now to protect the infra, the physical infra from this event. So it's easy. Insurance works like this. There is, again, my colleagues, enough debt, enough equity in the world, but it's better to do it now, as Christophe Béju was telling at the time of his government, than to wait 10 or 20 more years to say, oh, we'll see what happens. The chance we have is that the concession model helps to foster private investment now for 30, 20, 25, 50 years if it's needed, just to rise the equity and the debt now at a time where governments, and particularly in France, don't have the money because of budget debt and deficit to do it themselves.
Thank you. Thomas, digital infrastructure has a specific resilience challenge because it's the backbone of every other infrastructure, but it remains highly vulnerable. We're thinking about cyber attacks, but also physical disruptions. How do you think about resilience in a digital network, and is digital resilience primarily a technical challenge, an industrial challenge, or a governance challenge?
Performance will become more and more an issue of resilience. We operate in 10 European countries, and I'm going to give you a very concrete example, and you will realize that infra is a risky business, and you're doing a risky business. We operate in the Baltics. We had a sabotage of a submarine cable that totally disrupted the internet traffic during almost a quarter last year in Lithuania. We operate in Poland, and I can tell you that all the Polish networks are under a constant cyber attack from the other side of the border. And in Ukraine, we're also a telecom operator in Ukraine. Our infra is not only on the front line, it's on the firing line, keeping a country connected in wartime. So that's a reality. And how do you build resilience? In a different way. Number one, technical resilience. And in our industry, in the telecom industry, in the digital industry, it means redundancy of networks, backup route, fragmented distribution of your data center. It's also a question of industrial resilience. You have to secure your procurement policy. You mentioned that we are in a connected world, and it's true that we will never end up in an autarky situation, and I don't think it would be good. But we need to assume struggle dynamic, power struggle, and that's super important. And we need to create in Europe interdependency with China and the US. It should not be only one way. And the last way of building resilience, it's through governance, regulation, who on the infra, what is the risk of shutdown, for example, in terms of cloud services. But clearly, for a telecom operator, a huge part of our performance is resilience. Because you do expect that 99.99% of connectivity, but 100% and a real 100% in any circumstances.
Well, we're coming to the end of this roundtable. I'd like to thank you very warmly for taking the time and for speaking to us and for sharing your expertise. I think we can give them a warm round of applause. Thank you very much. Now, our next guest is a renowned energy and climate professional. She holds a PhD and a habilitation in political sciences and teaches at TU Berlin. She's also published widely on energy matters. Join me in welcoming Dr. Susan Nies.
Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to provide the concluding keynote. And when listening to such an interesting panel, first question is always, what was missing? What was coming often? What was unexpected? And what was cross-cutting? And when I'm thinking about what I missed in the discussion, it was clearly the citizens. In that sense that myself working on infrastructure and energy since more than 20 years, when you talk about you are working on infrastructure, people typically run away. A word that comes to no poem. It's just a horrible word, the same for permitting. But it's true, there is an end of invisibility. People started to get interested in infrastructure of all sorts, of electricity, of railways, especially in my home country, Germany, where trains are late, 70% of all of them, and blocked when they want to enter Switzerland. People started to get experts, be hobby engineers on the speed of electricity, on the transit volumes of Hormuz Strait. And these hobby engineers are a huge opportunity for the discussion we just had. And therefore, there will be no time anymore where infrastructure is just something that no one cares about. It's more a new normal where uncertainty, multiple risks, hybrid war. I think many of us were like this night looking at 2 o'clock, what will happen? The COVID was mentioned. All these things make infrastructure now a topic for everyone. Therefore, transparency is clearly the new currency. We also mentioned many times here the Draghi report. And I think everyone has read it, and most of us know it now by heart. 800 billion every year until 2035, 4.5 to 5% of EU GDP has to be invested mainly on infrastructure, topped with AI, clean energy, and also on defense. And there's also, when you're talking about in what these investments have to take place, it's the physical side, because the aging remains a mystery. Maybe like human beings, no one knows why someone at 100 is still able to jog, another one at 60 is already tired. Maybe the same goes for infrastructure. In my home country, Germany, in Dresden, a bridge was just collapsing and no one really understood why. Therefore, flexibility is clearly needed, and we need to invest massively. It's not the first time. We have invested in, say, the so-called New Deal in between two wars. Roosevelt, there was the Marshall Plan, which was a masterpiece of European construction after the devastating Second World War, and the American commitment to Europe, telling Europe, we invest, but only if you collaborate. So what are the learnings from those two cycles for today? Certainly was great what was happening before. Let's do it again, and let's put on top of it the AI. In our discussion, there was these cross-cutting topics, came several times, like collaboration versus autonomy or sovereignty, kind of everyone his own little North Korea, even if North Korea is quite interconnected, but it's kind of the perception we have of that country producing everything ourselves. And certainly the European answer to this, no, that's not the right answer. It's more collaboration, and we are not in for conflict. In Draghi's report, also the so-called 28 regime is meaning the regulatory structure. And several of the speakers here mentioned regulation, bureaucracy, the slow motion of all these things. And sure, the working together as 27 EU countries, and now in a way we have like a bracket around the UK with the crisis since Trump started again
UK is much closer to Europe than it ever was before, and even Switzerland joined finally the European electricity market. So in this situation, this 28 regime working together on regulation is on the one hand taking stock of our big compromise machine. It's not that Orban, thanks God, can dictate that we don't spend the money. Hopefully it's going out for good on 12th of April. It is a compromise machine where we always need to balance how much time can we spend on this compromise machine, and certainly the bureaucracy is a reality in Europe, the slow motion is a reality in Europe, but there can be no speed without compromise at once. I just want to quote a couple of speakers and what was said on this point on the funding and investment. Minister Lescure was mentioning we need an alliance of the strategic state and private investments. And I think that's a very nice way to formulate it. Yes, we go into a cycle of public investments. Public procurement was also mentioned as a great opportunity for made in Europe or made with Europe. So the strategic state plus private, and France has a huge tradition. Colbert was mentioned for sure. Deployment and conservative attitude to risk. Yes, yes, and yes. Anne-Christine was mentioning this. It is a risk to take no risk. And that is maybe our biggest problem in Europe also, that we want to have no mistakes done. There will be mistakes in going fast. We need mistakes to go fast, and we need to accept the risk of taking, we need to get away from the risk in taking risks. There was, Thomas was saying, move from Draghi to action. I think we cannot agree more on this. And then, Nicolas, also you mentioned it's possible to decarbonize. Yes, because when you see the industry today and seeing Italy claiming, let's get out of the ETS, other countries, let's go slower. My own Minister of Economics, Katharina Reiche, let's try to get out of any transition that might exist on the planet. The industry doesn't want this. They want certainty of the regulatory framework. The Aeons, the EDFs, and the Vauban's, and all these companies of this world want to have certainty in our decarbonization strategy. On the geopolitical tensions, it was interesting to hear from DDEM this widening gap between US and EU, and I think we all hope that is not forever. But also in the starting keynote by Gwen, you referred to Brzezinski, and this kind of Europe being a US protectorate or something like that. Yeah. And I think that's very interesting also when we look back in history. We had in the early 70s, the Vietnam Wars, means maybe no one, I was also a small person at that time, yeah. But still in that time was a major shift in the US-European relationship. Bretton Woods system was abandoned. Schmidt and Giscard started the EQ, Euro, and the snake before. So this is also an opportunity, and probably we are now moving into a European defense. We're probably also moving into some more Europe at different speeds, some more for defense, some more on other things. This is also an opportunity. It was interesting also to hear again from DDEM how easy, unfortunately, it is to derail national policies. The Inflation Reduction Act was our example in Europe on the Net Zero Industry Act. Now it's derailed. While it's very difficult, thanks God, to derail European policies. We see that Italy claimed, let's get rid of ETS, but we don't get rid of ETS. Yes, we move ETS 2 to 28. We have invented CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It was good to hear from you that it puts pressure on the others to work as a team. So it's too complicated, and there was this, Nicolas, you mentioned, too slow. We invest in India, in Brazil. It's too complicated in application in Europe, bureaucracy. I think what's important maybe to add to this absolutely true statement is that still it's not a vision for Europe to say, let's get rid of bureaucracy. I think we need some other vision, and infrastructure is a fantastic vision in this sense. And then, so to conclude, what are the, I want to say somewhat on resilience also. There was a Gabriele saying we need to be aware of risks. And I'm not totally sure about that, honestly, in going regularly to Ukraine, working with Ukrenergo and on the electricity transmission in that country. And I think why they made it until now is not because they have been aware of any risk. No one expected any of those risks, but they have been super flexible. They have been adapting to all kinds of risks. They started with Molotov cocktails, now are the masters in drones. And I think that's unfortunately also the name of the game, flexibility. Adapt to new risks as they emerge. The example by Thomas on the Baltics, on Poland, absolutely true. And the answer is the same in all infrastructure, more distributed, but not only distributed, a kind of more hybrid system with ultra HVDC, for example, in electricity with distributed island capability systems, certainly the answer. And Sandy Storm in New York has shown us that already in 2012. So what are the no-regret options? To conclude, we need to accept the high cost of infrastructure investment because that's the investment in our future, and it's only every 50 years. That's the good news, so it's not every time. Regulation is clearly a lever, so we need to have some of European, more integrated regulation with much faster speed. I also think the Industrial Accelerator Act is clearly an opportunity. Coming back again to the people, the social contract used this public fascination with infrastructure. And really, I must say, I love this name. I was always thinking, how can you replace this horrible word? In Germany, you would say sperrig, with something else. Yeah? And then Infravision is exactly the word that you need for that. Fantastic. So use this public fascination to build the social license for massive and rapid change. And then when it comes to this speed thing, so the real sovereignty in Europe would be the ability to build our future faster than the challenges can tear it down. Thanks a lot.
Just a word to thank you all for actually making it, because we last much longer than was initially scheduled, and this is a tribute to the vivid debate that we had and how interesting all the speakers were, and thank you all for your attention. Thank you to all the participants, to the panels and speakers. Thank you also to all the members of Infravision, and I couldn't encourage you more to join us all, because the more we will be, the more efficient we will. Thank you.